Hey everyone, today I'm going to be talking about UK based band While She Sleeps and their new album This Is the Six, which is also their debut album depending on how you look at their previous release, The North Stands for Nothing. Now, before I start with the review, I'm actually going to talk a little bit about The North Stands for Nothing and their previous career. Now, While She Sleeps formed in 2006, where they didn't really do a great deal and they weren't really a very serious band until around sort of late 2009, mid to late 2009, where they started performing a lot of live shows. Now, these live shows actually led to a lot of buzz because they were really, really energetic and just really great live shows. And as a result, they got a lot of media buzz regarding these live shows. This all led up to the mini-album release, The North Stands for Nothing. Once The North Stands for Nothing was released, it received a lot of rave reviews. This was in mid-2010. And it received these reviews because of the band's somewhat unique sound amongst the metalcore lot. Personally, I listened to the album the whole way through, and I thought it was okay. I don't necessarily agree that it was anything necessarily groundbreaking or, anything like that necessarily. I thought it was a solid EP. It had a couple of really good tracks on it. Like, the standout ones for me were the top track, The North Stands for Nothing, Hearts Aside Our Horses, and the one that really stood out the most and really sounded like they had a unique sound, more so than the others, was Crows, which was also the single. It was just a really, really great metalcore track, well written, had some unique vocals in it. But anyway, since then, between this release and also their live shows, they've actually built up a considerable fan base and have been on plenty of tours and played plenty of shows, and they've had enough time to really refine their live show, and it's a really, really great show now. As a result, this new album had a lot of hype to live up to. Anyway, onto the album. Now, it opens up with the track Dead Behind the Eyes, which I actually thought was probably the strongest track on the album. It is early, but Jesus, it's a good track. It's just an absolute riff monster. It's got a really great opening riff. It feels really visceral and aggressive. It's got tons of energy and just this really nice bounce to all the riffs as well. If you're into nu metal and that sort of thing, this riff is really going to stand out for you. As a whole, I just feel the track flows really nicely and there's a nice mix of brutality and melody. Another thing I think is absolutely great, which sort of goes along those lines of having a great melody and still sounding really heavy, is these really cool vocals they introduced sort of about a minute into the track, which was also in Crows, like I said. It's these they have the vocalist doing screams over the top, and then underneath that the guitarist, I believe, is singing, and it just sounds really great. Another thing about this song is it has an absolute monster of a chorus. It's just a really big chorus, so you're going to imagine that everyone is going to know the words to live, and it's going to come across really, really good and epic. Now, the main thing about this song is I feel it's just a really well-written song. It flows really nicely, but it doesn't necessarily feel too disjointed or like it's jumping from one place to another. It's just really, really nice. And another thing is it just really doesn't feel repetitive at all. The next track, False Freedom, is somewhat more melodic than the previous track. It's got less aggression in it, but it's still certainly an aggressive, pacey track like most of the songs on this album. It's got a really great melody. Another thing about it that I really liked is I feel the chorus is memorable, not because of the vocals or because of any cheesy lines thrown together. It's actually the guitar that's really gives it this memorability. Now, admittedly, this track didn't end so great, I felt. There was somewhat of a weak breakdown before going into a piano section with a huge sing-along bit at the end, and admittedly that sounded decent. It sounded a little bit cheesy maybe, especially on the piano part, which is a slight gripe I have throughout this whole album. But it still sounded big, it sounded nice, it sounds like something people are going to sing along to live again. The next track, Satisfied in Suffering, is one of the ones that sort of passed over me a little bit. It's just, again, tons of riffs, tons of decent melodies, and it's also filled with breakdowns like the tracks up to now. But I feel like on this track, perhaps the songwriting was slightly weaker, and it was just less memorable, to be perfectly honest. However, the next track I want to talk about, which is also the next track on the album, really picks it back up. Seven Hills. It was one of the other singles released. It just has this really catchy and memorable guitar melody to open the song, and there's this super pacey, aggressive drums and bass underneath it, and it just works really, really nice. And then the drums go into halftime, and the melody slows down as well, and it just sounds really great. It flows really nicely. It doesn't feel like it's changing or jumping too much. The riff that comes after this is absolutely great as well, I think, if somewhat generic, but it's still a great riff nonetheless. The song has a huge chorus that kicks in after that. One thing that I thought was really nice is, like I said, throughout a lot of this album, there's a lot of screaming over the singing. In this track on the chorus, they sort of do the opposite, which gives it a really nice feel. There's, the singing is in the forefront, the screaming is underneath the singing, and it just gives this really, really nice feel to it. One thing I thought was great about this track is the very ending just sounds gargantuan. There's this really nice build up, and then it just kicks into this final sing along part, and it just sounds really, really great. It doesn't sound cheesy at all or anything like that. It just sounds really, really great. For me, this track is probably my favourite on the album, bar Dead Behind the Eyes. Those two tracks really stand out. The track after this, Our Courage, Our Cancer, is one I have a slight gripe with. Although the actual song is good and it's got a really nice solo in the middle of the track, it opens with this really kind of flat piano that doesn't really do a great deal for me. One thing I thought that was nice on this track though is the fact that they reference their previous work, The North Stands for Nothing, and a section in that. The next track, This Is the Six, was another single off the album. It had a video and stuff like that. It was a bit of a cheesy video, but ignore that. It opens up with some really great drums, and there's these nice distant guitars with the vocalist screaming over the top. Then it eventually kicks into a breakdown with admittedly some rather cliche lyrics, but it still sounds really, really good. The next riff is great, very memorable before going to a huge chorus. The guitar work on this track is incredibly melodic, and again I feel this track is just a really, really great, well written track that flows nicely, and it's just a really, really great mix of a kind of brutal sound and also a very, very melodic sound. The next track, The Chapel, is kind of an interlude track, and I suppose it can be forgiven a little bit for the fact that it's kind of dull and a little bit repetitive, but it's not. It still sounds fairly nice, it just drags a bit. However, again, like I said, it can be forgiven, I suppose, because it's an interlude track. The next track on the album, Believe, is one of the tracks they sort of released just after The North Stands for Nothing, actually. It's a really, really old track, it's been around for a while, but they've sort of changed it up a little bit, and it just has a nicer production now. It's slightly different structurally, and it sounds really, really good as a result. However, I must admit, this track I never really liked a great deal. The opening melody I always felt was a bit weak. The breakdown, it goes into that after that, although it's very bouncy and very nice, feel is somewhat lackluster. It just doesn't really have a kick or anything like that. And the rest of the track pretty much repeats a lot of what we've already heard up to this point, which is actually something I want to say about this album. Although I feel it's a really, really good album, I feel it's a solid modern metalcore album, I do feel like they could have perhaps varied it up a bit more. Another track like Dead Behind the Eyes would have been great, focusing more on the more brutal side of their sound, focusing more on the riffs as opposed to the melodies. But anyway, the next track, Until the Death, opens up with this really sort of distant, solid riff, and there's some thumping toms throughout the intro with some screamed vocals over the top, and eventually it all just kicks in and it sounds absolutely great at this point. The next part I thought was a bit hit or miss. It wasn't that great afterwards, but again, it's all very similar riffs to what I've heard before, very similar melodies, and really changing up a great deal. The next track, Love at War, opens with this piano and this bass drum constantly thumping with the vocals over the top. Something I want to point out at this point actually is one thing I really want to praise about this record is the production. It sounds great. All of the riffs just sound really, really thick, really, really nice and warm. I can hear the bass, I can hear the drums clearly. The drums, actually I will say on this record, are produced really nicely. They drive a lot of the songs and change them up a lot. The vocals are probably my favourite part of the production. They just sound absolutely great. All the screamed vocals sound really visceral. All of the sung bits are really, really great and gargantuan, and it just gives you this really, really nice sing-along-y type feeling. Now, the last track on the album, Bar Reunite, The Plague of a New Age, opens with a real kick in the teeth of a breakdown, and it's combined with these really, really nice screamed vocals, as I've said before, and it's really one of the more aggressive moments on the LP. After this section in the song, I feel it's a touch tame, maybe. Maybe the sung vocals slightly killed it, they're underneath the screamed vocals. However, the rest of the song flows really nicely. Another breakdown, chorus, another nice breakdown, which is very, very overused on this album, not gonna lie. Now I feel this track really, really ends well, like a lot of these tracks actually. It just has a really, really solid ending. There's sort of a solo or guitar melody with some vocals screaming over the top, and the guitar's left ringing until the end, and it just fades out really, really nicely. Then, the next track, Reunite, opens up with another piano intro, and to be fair, it's just piano, it's an outro to the track. It's sort of tried to be very minimalist and that sort of thing. And if I'm completely honest, it does feel a touch out of place, as the record was very, very much based around brutal riffs, some really, really nice breakdowns, and great melodies. I feel like it's a little bit of a cheap way almost to end the album. So anyway, to sum that up, I feel this is a really, really solid effort from a band that feels like it's maturing, And maybe there are a few too many repeated themes, too many similar breakdowns and melodies. For example, I think it was Love at War and also Seven Hills that had two really similar melodies. Another thing I felt was somewhat overused throughout this whole album was before these breakdowns, what they do is they have the drums start playing on the hi-hats and have really sparse bass and snare hits with one guitar playing the breakdown that's about to kick in the distance, and you can sort of hear the pattern and pick it out, and there's sometimes some vocals underneath. That was pretty much used for almost every breakdown. Another thing they overused a lot, I felt, was it's typical of a lot of metalcore bands, but the sort of whole, they cut out for a count of 4 and the vocalist screams something, then it kicks into a breakdown with everything else just dead. Now, despite my criticism for this record, I do feel that it's a very, very solid modern metalcore record that has some unique aspects, such as the vocals with the screaming and the singing that sounds really, really nice and unique to them. Also, ultimately, the vast majority of these songs really do feel like songs and not just riff after riff after riff like a lot of metalcore bands do. And as a result, I kept coming back to these songs and remembering these songs. Now, I do feel what While She Sleeps are doing is somewhat unique to them. I don't think they're reinventing the wheel. I don't think they're going to be the next big thing in terms of innovation. But I do think they have a great songwriting ability and some things unique to them. Another thing they can do is just they can really mix melody and brutal riffs really, really nicely. Now, as far as the score goes, I think I'm going to give this album a 7 out of 10, because I really did enjoy this album, to be honest, but it probably won't feature in my albums of the year. Now, on another note, I actually was lucky enough to see While She Sleeps live at the Electric Ballroom in London, and I actually got there really, really late and missed two bands I wanted to see, which was Polar and Crossfaith, because I've heard a lot about both these bands, but I got there just in time to catch the end of Bleed From Within, who were really, really good, to be fair, and I also caught all of While She Sleeps set. And I must say, they had a really, really tight performance. There were a few little bits where the members fell out of time, stuff like that, but it wasn't too bad, and for the majority, it really did sound tight. And the other thing is they just had a really, really nice onstage energy and onstage presence. The song sounded great through the PA and the speakers and stuff. And if you haven't checked out this band, I highly recommend you to on a live front if you're going to. Now, for their live show, due to all of these reasons, I would actually give them about an 8 out of 10 for that show. I thought it was a really, really, really great show. Loads of fun, nice atmosphere, lots of energy again from the band. Vocalists kept getting in the crowd, as vocalists do. So to summarise, if you're into metalcore, if you're into the whole Parkway Drive, Bring Me the Horizon, August Burns Red and stuff like that, I think you'll really dig While She Sleeps, and you should definitely give this album a listen. But anyway, that's everything from me. Bye.